Emmy, you read me? How goes the mission?
Hey Mal, still getting myself psyched up for it. And it's Yar.
Emmy, I've known you since you were 12. I'm not calling you by your handle.
I always find it very interesting to see what developers will cook up when reimagining a retro IP for modern audiences. And I think for the most part, the folks over at WayForward Technologies did a good job with Yars Rising. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen a new entry into the storied Yars IP since the original in 1982. Just 2 years ago in 2022, we saw both Yars Recharged and Yars Reimagined release. But this is the first time that we've seen a Yars game as a stealth platformer set in a Metroidvania world. Yars Rising has all of the hallmarks of what we've come to know and love about WayForward games. Anime art, humor, retro-inspired mechanics, great voice acting, and of course an absolute banger of a soundtrack. Now the story will see you following Emi Kimura, codenamed Yar, as she seeks to infiltrate the mysterious Quotech Corporation. You'll run, jump, sneak, and hack your way through a Metroidvania-style map with a heavy emphasis on the hacking, the platforming, and not so much of a heavy emphasis on the combat. The story will play out through a series of cutscenes and dialogue sequences, and there's even some dialogue while you're playing through, which is a good thing because there's a lot of times where you're traveling and backtracking and it feels kind of empty. The story has plenty of mystery, twists and turns, and little nuggets and nods to past Atari games and also past entries in the series. I found the story element of the game to be actually pretty enjoyable. It's really impressive what they managed to do with something with kind of so little lore to draw from, but I think what they did here made it really interesting, and I would like to see this story go further than just one game. Now, the first big element of the game that I want to discuss is the hacking, and this is going to be something that either draws players to it or pushes them away. I don't think there's going to really be a middle ground because of how much emphasis is placed on the hacking, but basically there's a lot of terminals and computers that you need to hack, sometimes to open a door, other times it's to earn upgrades that are required, or optional biohacks. And they all play like little mini games. A lot of them are inspired by Yars. Some other ones might be inspired by like other Atari greats like Centipede or Pong. And for me personally, I do enjoy retro games, and I did like this aspect of the gameplay, but I think for some that maybe don't like this, it might be enough to push you away from this game and make it either not fun if you decide to play it, or you might look at it and say, no thank you. You can't disable this, but what you can do is you can toggle an accessibility option where if you fail one of these mini games, you don't take any damage. So you essentially have infinite tries with no worries about potentially failing and getting a game over and resetting to your previous checkpoint. Now, there's a wide variety of these, and there's so many, in fact, that it would take me forever to kind of touch upon how each one plays differently, but just understand that there's a lot of these in the game, and it's a huge component of the overall experience. So if this looks like something that you would not enjoy, if you don't like retro games, if you don't like this concept, you're probably going to want to steer clear of this game because you will spend a lot of time playing through these mini games to hack and earn upgrades and things of that nature. Now, the next main component of the overall game is platforming, and over the course of your journey, you will acquire upgrades in traditional Metroidvania fashion, like a high jump or ability to air dash and things like that. I'm not going to spoil them all, but you'll occasionally come to points in the game where you can't progress without a specific upgrade, and the map system does an excellent job of tracking all of this for you, so you can easily see areas that you cannot go to yet, or areas maybe that you previously traveled to and couldn't go to, but now you can. And you can see where the biohacks are by the little Yar icon on the map. If it's blue, you haven't got that upgrade yet. If it's grayed out, you have. Platforming is a highlight of the game. It is a main component of it because the next part, the combat, is definitely not the highlight of the experience. Now, the combat plays very similar to like Mega Man, I would say, because you basically have a pea shooter that you can shoot bullets out of your hand, and you can upgrade these using the biohack system, but for the most part, you just move around and shoot. You can't shoot up, which seems like an oversight, and you can't really do much else until later in the game when eventually you will acquire a specific upgrade that you need to complete the game. And since we're keeping it spoiler free, I'm not going to mention exactly what that is. Now, the upgrades kind of come in a few different forms. You have your permanent upgrades that you'll acquire from special terminals, but you also have biohacks, which are like perks and improvements to not just Emmy, but also her Yar form that you play as in the mini games. And all of these biohacks are scattered throughout the map. I found them really fun to seek out and unlock. I tried to earn all of them. And then you have this upgrade screen in the pause menu. So you basically have Emmy's tattoo on her arm, which is the Yar ship from the original game. And each pixel is essentially a block, and these biohacks take up a certain amount of blocks. They almost look like Tetris blocks, and you can fit these however you see fit into her tattoo, and that's the ones that you essentially have equipped. Now, I actually really like this kind of upgrade system in fitting what you want into this limited space, and found it pretty enjoyable. It's almost like another little mini game inside of the game, so I like this way that they handled the biohacks as your kind of passive upgrades. Now, another thing that I want to talk about that goes along with the combat, and this is probably, in my opinion, the worst part of the overall experience, and another thing that might turn off some players, is that the enemy and bosses are, by and large, incredibly unsatisfying to fight. There's a very limited pool of enemies. They're all really generic, not necessarily in their designs visually, but in their attack patterns and the way they behave. They're just not fun to fight. And the same kind of goes for the bosses. I wouldn't say the bosses are terrible, but they're really generic. And all of the boss fights were kind of And for somebody like myself that really enjoys combat and Metroidvanias, just understand that this is the worst component of the main three things I mentioned. The hacking, the platforming, and the combat. This is easily the weakest link. So if you enjoy games that place a heavy emphasis on enemy designs and variety, and you find it satisfying to overcome like really challenging boss fights, I don't know that you're going to be satisfied by what Yars Rising has to offer in this regard. The boss fights, again, are fine. They're not bad. They're not great. They're kind of middle of the road. Then the last thing I kind of want to mention before we wrap this up is that you do unlock some additional content as you play through. When you complete the game, you will unlock a harder difficulty. So if you enjoyed your time with Yars Rising, there is a harder difficulty that you can play through. Also, the mini games, which are essentially the hacking mini games, you do unlock those to play at any time in the menus, and it does track like kind of your high scores, or in this case they're not scores, but your fastest times and things like that for each one. And there's a ton of these. So if you really enjoy this aspect of the game, you have plenty of content here to keep you busy beyond just clearing the story mode, which for me took about 7 to 7.5 hours with 100% on my save file. Now, I didn't really dive into the story too much or the voice acting or anything like that because that all kind of ties into like spoiler territory, but I do again want to mention that I really did enjoy the story and the voice acting was top notch. If you watched my preview where I played the Yars Rising demo a few months back, you do know that I did highlight that aspect of the game, and I'm pleased to say it holds up through the entirety of the experience. The soundtrack, again, is an absolute banger. And I don't want to just single out one composer because it did have a lot of different vocalists and composers that worked on the various tracks for this game. But it did include Megan McDuffie, and her sound and kind of vibe for her music really resonates with me. So her tracks on this soundtrack were some of my absolute favorites. But across the board, everybody that took part in this element of the game knocked it out of the park. So expect to be in for a treat if you enjoy video game soundtracks with this game. Now that kind of brings me to my conclusion on Yars Rising, and this is a really tough one to definitively recommend or not recommend because I think the combat and the hacking elements are going to be kind of divisive, and that some people are going to really like the emphasis on the hacking and some are not. Some people might like that there's not a lot of combat, and some people might not. So ultimately, I hope I covered everything in depth enough for you to decide for yourself if you think this would be a fun one to play. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy the combat, which normally I do enjoy combat-heavy games, but since I like the hacking so much and did enjoy the challenge of those retro-inspired mini-games, I found this to be a good use of my time. And if you're kind of the same as me, and that's how you look at it, I think this is an easy game to recommend for you. But if you enjoy combat and you don't enjoy the hacking, and maybe you're not crazy about stealth, which honestly I didn't even mention much because the stealth is kind of not really anything special. It's very basic. It's not punishing at all. Then I don't really know what to say. This might not be one for you. But overall, I hope this review helped you. So I appreciate you watching this review. If you enjoyed it, give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions on anything maybe that I missed, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But until next time, have a good one.